For the people following at home, the presentations of our speakers are shown very large on your screen, while the camera view is very small. So should you want to switch between views, just click on the smallest image to enlarge it. If you've got questions, both for the speakers or technical questions, please use the chat. This year's edition of Let's Talk Science is, as you can see, hosted by the VUB, the Vrije Universiteit Brussel. So we have asked Jan Dankaert, Rector of the VUB, for an opening address. Please, Professor Dankaert.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our VUB campus. Welcome to Let's Talk Science, the annual summer school on science communication. The doctoral schools and the science communication teams of the 5 Flemish universities and of the VLORA, the Council of the Universities of Applied Sciences and Arts, the Hogescholen, joined forces. The next 3 days, they offer you a program of inspiring sessions and workshops on numerous aspects of science communication. Writing, debating, pitching, giving interviews, Instagramming, designing attractive infographics. It's all part of a communication toolkit that you, as a researcher, have at your disposal. Very useful for rectors also, or if you ever aspire a career in academic leadership. This joint organization started 9 years ago at the VUB, and so we are tremendously enthusiastic to give you a warm welcome once again. Not only here physically in this very Aula Q of the VUB campus, Aula Roger van Geen, but also in virtual spaces. As for the first time, the summer school is organized both physically and virtually, so in a blended hybrid format, which probably is becoming the new normal. I'm very happy to see that many of you are looking for tips, inspiration, opportunities, and practice to develop your skills. Because, dear colleagues, scientists, science communication is of great importance for a number of reasons, and I'll highlight 3 of them. Let us start with the most opportunistic, but also the most realistic. Scientific research is, by big majority, paid by taxpayers' money. Therefore, it's every researcher's duty to give insight into the use of this money and explain what the benefits for society are that the society can look forward to. And speaking about money, don't forget also that the funding bodies, FAO, but also others, also urge you to engage in science communication. That's another reason. But this is the extrinsic reason. There are also intrinsic ones. Second reason is that science communication can be very rewarding for you as a researcher. It can be inspiring, can be just plain fun to interact with people outside your field and by explaining what you do, why you do it, what is your passion. And moreover, it's often the case that science communication, by forcing you to go down to the essence of your work in a way that everybody understands and listening to their ideas about that, helps you also to find new insights, new contacts, and new ways to explore, to engage. Third reason, last but not least, there's the importance for people today to understand the impact of science and technology on their daily lives. And I think this has become very apparent in the last years, undeniably, when our world got hit by the COVID pandemic. And then whether you're an immunologist, a historian, an economist, an engineer, or a physicist like me, scientists with good communication skills are a major asset in the formation of sound judgment and critical thinking throughout society, in whatever discipline you might be working. Today, we want to dwell upon this very last reason, the societal impact. Too often, academics still think that science communication is a fun or a side business to spread the love for science, or by filling unknown people with knowledge-curious scientific facts. Too often researchers engage in communication activities without thinking who they want to reach and what they want to change in their audience. This is also something you have to think about when you are teaching. Please do not underestimate the impact of your insights, of your analysis, of your explanations. Don't hesitate to step forward with your expertise and help non-experts to understand what is known, what is also not known, or what part of your knowledge is still uncertain, what is still under study. Also, that was very apparent in the pandemic. Knowledge was shifting all the time. The process of scientific research, Science in Action, which was a book when I was a young researcher by the French sociologist Bruno Latour, was very popular. The process of scientific research, its certainties, uncertainties, knowledge gaps are important elements in the scientific literacy that is vital. And you all have a role in building and fortifying this. In other words, thoughtful communication is nothing less than a crucial tool if you want your research to bear fruit to society. For this plenary session, we invited a research policy officer and 3 researchers, Esther De Smet, Alex, Sarah Aharach, and Marijke Huismans, to share their insights on engaging with stakeholders and try to reach impact. They will talk about co-creating research projects, about citizen science, about straightforward communication through traditional and social media. I will not make any further statements other than urging us all to actively engage in discussions and consciously look for questions, for needs, for worries, for fears you may have, and also worries among citizens, of course. Thank you all for your engagement to become even better communicators. You can all make a difference and become also a better researcher by doing this. And I wish you all the energy and eagerness to explore the do's and don'ts of science communication and to experience its impact and benefits. Be accessible, be enthusiastic, passionate, be patiently also persistent, be most of all clear. Enjoy the rest of this summer school. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Dankaert, for this enthusiastic welcome. I'm sure it will be a stimulating morning. So what does the program look like? We'll start with a keynote from Esther De Smet, who will explain to us what this impact thing is all about. And we'll proceed, like the director said, with 3 testimonials from researchers who all in their own way achieved impact through communication. After the first one, we'll have a short break. After the last one, we'll have some room for questions and discussion. But first, Esther De Smet. She is a senior policy advisor at Ghent University with a profound passion for societal impact. She will endeavor to increase your impact literacy by showing the what, how, and who. Esther, the floor is yours. Lukt het? De mute is dan zo.
Ja. Ja, werkt het?
Misschien nog een beetje dichter.
Yeah, I think it works. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for having me. So yes, I work as a research advisor at the research department of Ghent University. And I was thinking maybe it doesn't really make sense for you to have me here having a whole talk on impact literacy, but I do think it's important. So why and what does this have to do with a conference on science communication? Well, small spoiler alert, if you care about communicating your research, you should also care about impact of your research, and you probably already do. So let us just delve into what this strange beast of impact is within academia. And We've been hearing a lot about it the past 10 years, I guess, and everyone's talking about you need to have impact and it's important to have impact. Funders are talking about impact, but let's just together look at what it actually is. So maybe again, what is impact? Just a definition so that we're all on the same line. Impact is the effects of research in the real world. So impact is the changes that we can see, that we can demonstrate, measure, capture, beyond academia. So in society, in economy, in the environment. And it happens because of something we did through research. So it can be caused by research, your research can contribute to the impact. And an impact might look different according to what type of research you do. It might look different whether you do applied research, whether you do fundamental research, and it also looks different according to your discipline. Once we know that impact is the effects of your research in the real world, let's just share some things about impact. You'll be hearing quite a lot of different terminology when you delve into the world of impact. And actually these words matter because there's a difference between all these different words. You'll hear things like impact, science communication, dissemination, exploitation, commercialization, all the Asians will be in there, but also things like knowledge exchange, knowledge mobilization, public engagement, outreach. Is this all impact? Or are we talking about something different? And so it's very important once you start out thinking about the impact, which is the effect, which is the thing at the end of the tunnel, that you know which is the process to get to the impact and what is actually meant by the impact and by whom. Who's talking about impact? Who's using the word impact? And especially when you look to funding proposals, you have to know what is meant by the funder when they talk about impact or when they talk about dissemination. So you need to be strategic about this as well. So very big difference between the pathway to impact, the process of impact, value creation, you might say, or the result, the impact itself. And the result might be positive, which is something we all hope for through our research, but it might be negative as well. Next important thing is knowing that context matters. Not just the funding context, which is one of the first things we already mentioned, but also maybe there's a larger framework that your funder or your stakeholder finds important. Things like the Sustainable Development Goals, for instance. These are things that are aimed at impact in society, less poverty, no more hunger. Things like that are essentially definitions of impact. So the context matters. The context also matters because you're all scientists, you're all researchers working within an academic system which incentivizes certain behavior, which rewards certain behavior. So it's about knowing where impact has a place in this larger scheme of things. And also remembering that you're in an international context. And in all these different countries and regions, impact might be looked at in a different way, but you are still within that international context. So it is a conversation, especially in collaborative projects, that you need to have with your colleagues as well. What do they understand when you talk about impact, and how are they incentivized to get to impact? The context of impact is also that whole process of getting there, which means a lot of people say, well, it's impossible to measure, to really feel what the impact is. It's something intangible. That doesn't mean that you cannot plan for the impact. So you have to think about that pathway in advance, because along the way you'll have opportunities that might lead you away from your pathway, but might be opportunities that might lead to a bigger impact. So it's good to have a strategy before you start out in your research discovery. and actually plan for the impact you would like to have. But don't forget that it's all about continually asking the question, do I need to be doing this in order to achieve this impact? Why? Why should I care about this? Why should my stakeholders care about this? So it's iteration of the question. And also allowing for serendipity, you know, the happy circumstances that happen along the way. Impact is often influenced by your context. For instance, if you're a social scientist and you want to make a difference by proposing new legislation, well, you have to have a favorable government to take up your research suggestion and to take up your research results and actually want to change legislation. So a lot depends on the context in which you're working as well. But if you remember one thing, it is that the pathway matters. It's the process that matters. And don't get bogged down by, I have to have an impact. It's more about, how am I working towards impact as a scientist? What is important to society, but also to research and to whoever I am in that whole journey? So, wrapping up on the definition of impact, impact might be big, it might be small. You might change the legislation of an entire country, or you might change how the traffic light works at the end of your street. It might be big, it might be small. We're not comparing impacts. We're not saying one is better than the other. It might be local, it might be global. It might be instrumental. You might see a change which is direct, changing people's lives. Or it might be something conceptual, people thinking about something in a very different way. It might be quantitative. Your research might create a new opportunity for jobs. But it might also be qualitative, something really intangible, sentiments, behavior that changes. There is no single type of impact and no single pathway to impact. So there must be something out there for every one of you because it's so diverse. So it is important to understand how impact works for you and for your research. It's an individual journey as well. And more specifically, it's important that you're able to understand and make decisions about how to connect your research to society. And that is impact literacy, which is what I'll be focused upon now. So I want to get you all impact literate, as it were. In simple terms, impact literacy means that you understand what changes, what impacts happen, for whom, and how you can demonstrate it. It also means that you know how you can push your research into action. So the process of value creation, you understand this. And it's also about knowing who is needed in that whole process, what type of skills that are needed to make all of this happen. That is impact literacy. So it's the what, how, and who, and we'll be zooming in on those in a minute. So the idea is that you try and find something in this whole process that fits you as a researcher, that fits your research, your talents, your interests, even your passions, and your stakeholders so that you can connect your research to society. So let's just look at the main building blocks of having an impact literate attitude. First, we'll turn to the what. So what we propose in a good impact planning strategy is that you dare to flip your approach. So forget about, for a minute, forget about FWO saying there's a big call and you can just send in all kinds of proposals. No, you have to take a step back. You have to start out what is the societal issue that is facing us today? And then you can start looking back at, and how can my research provide a little piece of the puzzle to solve that societal issue? So instead of turning it around and saying, this is my research, here you are, dear FWO, you do the opposite thing. And you say, this is what faces us as a society. And this is what my research might contribute to solving that issue. And so that means that in your pathway, you need to think about, if we want to solve that issue, and this is the element of my research, what type of activities do I need to set up? And what type of outputs need to be delivered from these activities? And what type of outcomes, which is one step further, do we need to be able to deliver? And what type of impact will that, in effect, have? And if you do that exercise, you always have to keep asking yourself the question, right, so these activities, why? Why these activities? And how? How should we be doing them? And with each of those steps, you always have to go back in this iterative process and think, so what and how? So instead of letting your quest for research funding take the main stage and do the talking, flip your approach and think of, how might my research provide a little piece of the puzzle for a societal issue? And if all fundamental scientists in the audience are now thinking, but I'm not working towards this one big societal issue. Yes, you are, but maybe your immediate research users are your peers. Maybe they will take the whole impact pathway further than you might ever take it. And that's fine too. So impact planning is framing the issue, first of all. Start out big. Let's take the example of, let's have fewer casualties, pedestrians dying in traffic. That's the big issue. And then try and focus it down to where your research is situated. If you're an engineer, you might think about, how might we change the algorithm that is used in traffic lights for pedestrian crossings? If you're a social scientist or a psychologist, you might think, so I'm a behavioral psychologist, what do I need to do? What's the challenge of changing people's behavior when they come to a crossing? So every type, if you're a mathematician, you might be into cues and wachtertheorie, yeah, I forgot the word now, but you know, queuing and the whole logic around queuing. You might think, how might I solve that kind of issue as a little piece of the puzzle of making sure there's less casualties in traffic? So that's the first thing you need to do. Frame the issue from big to small, and then tie it into your research. So flip the issue and do the whole how, so what cycle. And that will lead you to identify the pathways, the activities, outputs, outcomes. That's the pathway to get to the impact. And make sure that you know what a successful pathway might look like. So find some indicators, find some evidence that might suggest this is a successful activity, this is a successful output. And you'll only be able to do that if you also, at the same time, identify your stakeholders. And we'll get back to stakeholders in a minute, because they are crucial in your whole pathway. And then you can start thinking about, well, who do I need to actually co-produce all these activities, these outputs, these outcomes, so that the impact is co-produced as well. And of course, co-producing means that you need to be communicating. You need to exchange information with those stakeholders. And it might be quite active, it might also be quite passive. But again, these are some of the building blocks, and we'll delve down into each of them. So, first of all, it's step one, it's finding that magic match between your research and the stakeholders and how to connect those two. So these pathways, these roads to impact, you need to think about, so what type of process do I need if I want to, for instance, change or improve public understanding or public behavior? That's a type of impact you would like to have. Or maybe you want to change legislation or policy. Maybe you want to change and influence professional practices, develop resources, training, and so on. So that's where you want to end up. And so what do you need? What type of process might you need to get there? So methodologies, types of pathways are, for instance, all the examples we'll see after my talk, namely citizen science, co-creating your research question, participatory research, public engagement, and science communication. So once and for all, people, science communication is not the impact, it's the pathway to impact. Science communication in itself is the activity to get to the impact, it's not the impact itself. But it might also be technology transfer if you're in the more STEM-related sciences, consultancy, training. So pick your pathway and try and find out whether that's the best pathway to get to that impact that we already planned ahead. So how do we need to engage with stakeholders? What is it that we actually, what's the magic potion? So let's dive deeper into this relationship with your stakeholders. So we're now talking about the who. So we did the what, we did the kind of how, now look at the who. So it's about finding out who are your beneficiaries, the decision makers, and your collaborators, because these are all different roles your stakeholders can take. You have to find out who has an interest in my research. And interest is quite broad. It is who can help you frame the problem and co-design the research question. That might be one type of stakeholder. Who can help you co-produce the research? Maybe there's knowledge out there. Well, it's not maybe. There is knowledge outside academia that you can actually tap into. Who can help you communicate your work? Who can help you provide data? Who will benefit as an end user of your research? These are all types of stakeholders. So it does really, well, I cannot stress this enough. It's really important that before you start out doing your impact journey, that you have a really good think about who are my stakeholders and who do I need to engage. How will I engage these people? And when? When in this pathway is the ideal time to engage them, and how will I engage them? You need to think about this because they have to be part of the journey and they have to trust you in that journey to give their time and knowledge to you as well. And you have to be specific. Don't say, I'll be working with policymakers. That's too vague. You need to know which department, which people, so that you can actually target these people and that you get to know them and get to know how you can target them and when you need to target them. Is there some point, this really strategic point in the policy cycle that you have to get them? Things like that. And that takes time and experience. But that also means that maybe by now you think, do I need to do all this? Am I the only one responsible for the impact? That's too much. I'm just a young researcher. I'm not out there to change the world. Well, I hope you are, but maybe in a small way. Don't feel pressured. Impact is a group effort. And it's important that within your research group, it's a conversation you have all together, because everyone provides their little piece of the puzzle. And so who has the impact? Is it actually you as a researcher, or is it your research user that takes up the knowledge and does something with it? You're just providing it. Maybe it's like a relay race. You're just one element in giving the baton to the next user. What skills do you need to make all this impact happen? Do you need a good communicator? Yeah, you probably will need someone who can communicate really well, but maybe you need someone who's really good at participatory processes and so on. So identify these things, and when you're identifying these skills, also think about the legal and ethical issues. Yes, it's becoming a whole list, and that's why it's a group effort. And also think about what will be the challenges that you will face in interacting with your stakeholders and what they will face in interacting with you. Because sometimes it feels like you're speaking different languages, that you're working in different contexts. it is all about having this dialogue and this interaction with your stakeholders. Of course, where does communication then fit in? The other big building block in your impact plan is not just your stakeholder analysis, but having a communication strategy. So that's what we'll look at next. Your communication underpins your entire pathway. You need to be communicating throughout that process. Don't just sit on your results and wait for it until someone magically appears and asks you for, so what have you been doing lately? It has to be proactive as well. So think, starting with those stakeholders that you've identified, the next step is identifying how they can help you in your communication, because they often have platforms that you otherwise won't have access to. But also think about, so who's then my public? Who's my target audience for these messages? Who needs to be doing something with it? And you only have 24 hours a day, and you don't work 24 hours a day, I hope. So you have to make choices. You have to prioritize in what types of communication you do and who you communicate with or to. And so it's looking at where will be my biggest impact when I communicate. Also tie this in with your own skills. If you just crumble on stage talking to a group of people, don't do that type of communication. Do something else. Find something that suits you. Blog, tweet, I don't know, go into reenactment if you're an historian and that's your thing. There's so many possibilities out there, and I think a conference like this will help you train in all these different types. You don't need to master them all. I think by now you're thinking, right, there's a lot of work still to do, but don't worry. At every university, there's people to help you with your impact planning. And also, remember, it's a group effort. But I think the testimonials that we'll see now will also inspire some of you to see whether this might be a pathway for your research or not. I'll be here later when you have any questions. So thanks for listening and enjoy the rest of the talks.
Yes, thank you, Esther, for taking us with you to the Rome of impact. As earlier said, we'll take questions at the end of the session, so without further ado, let's proceed to our first testimonial. It comes from Alexis De Waele, psychology professor at Ghent University, and coordinator of PSYNC, which is an interdisciplinary research consortium on mental health. In his talk, he'll discuss how, within several research cases, communication and especially co-creation played a key role in trying to achieve societal impact. Alexis, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Esther, to begin with, because you explained all about impact, and I was kind of hoping that you would do that, so I would not have to explain that. So thanks for that. Is this mic on? No? But now it is. Okay, perfect. Okay, welcome everyone. So thanks for the nice introduction as well, David. My name is Alexis De Waele. I'm indeed the coordinator of a consortium called Working Together for Mental Health. So at Ghent University, we have 10 of these interdisciplinary consortia that all work on a very specific societally relevant topic like aging, or in my case, mental health. So, and these consortia are all about engagement, working with stakeholders and trying to achieve societal impact. And so I will try to explain you something about that. And I will talk to you about three case studies, three research or projects that we conducted at Ghent University, and with some different time scales. I think the first one is the Sexpert study. It goes a bit back in time, so 10 years ago. And I think the advantage of having diverse case studies is that we also can reflect on longer term impact, because of course impact is not something which arises immediately after you write up that publication. It often takes some time, and I will also explain you about some other of these case studies that are quite different. But let's start with, well, not talking about sex, but close enough. Let's talk about the Sexpert study. It was from 2010 to 2014. And it was all about moving the beacons of our understanding of sexual health. So that's quite an ambitious aim. Sexpert was quite a large study. I always also mention the budget because the budget is important. It enables you to do some things. So that matters. That does not mean that if you have a smaller budget that you cannot do anything. On the contrary, but still, it is important. So this was a large 4-year project where we worked with 11 full-time equivalents on that project. And it were actually 3 studies in one. So one study was on sexual health in the global population in Flanders. So it was based on a representative study. But we had also a study on ethnic minorities, Turkish, Moroccan individuals, and also one on lesbian, gay, and bisexual individuals. So it were 3 studies in one. From these 11 people with whom we worked with, there was one valorization manager. So this is one of the topics, valorization, impacts, and so forth and so on. But this was, of course, quite important, that these were actually 2 half-time persons who had the responsibility of valorization, of making the research useful. This was also an SBO project. They still exist. They are nowadays they are funded by the FWO, and these are larger projects that really have a specific societal aim. So now, how did we communicate and co-create? So of course, we had a valorization strategy that was developed before the project started, and the proposal, of course. And for valorization, this tapped into the fact that we set up 2 communication platforms, 2 groups of stakeholders, one group that worked on issues of care, and another group that worked on health promotion. And they met about 3 times a year. Besides that, we also had a larger user group where all stakeholders came together once a year. And besides that, also before we started this first large survey, we organized 10 focus groups with what we could call end users. Basically, everyone who ever had sex or was interested in sex. So a lot of people, but basically 10 focus group, 3 age groups, youth, adults, and then senior citizens. And each time we did it with men and women separately. And then besides that, also we had focus groups with the ethnic and with the Turkish and Moroccan minorities, and also with lesbian, gay, and bisexual individuals. We tried to explore how they felt about sexual health. What does it mean for them? But also what are important topics in their personal lives. And then finally, also if they could anticipate on methodological pitfalls as well, because of course, having interviews about sexual health is of course, for some, a touchy subject. But then finally, talking with the press, of course, I should not explain to you that journalists were quite interested in this study. So sexual health is a very popular topic in the media, of course. So it was not that easy to build up contact with journalists. But one important lesson we learned from this, and this is, I think, important for all of you, take control of your communication strategy when you talk to journalists. What does this mean? It means that you have a clear message. You write usually a press release with a very clear message that journalists will hopefully then like. It also means that you know what you do not want to communicate. I will give a specific example. For example, we always find gender differences when we explore statistics. So this was also the case in sexual health research, of course, but many of them were relatively small, and we saw much more that men and women were much more equal than they were different. So we did not want journalists to write men are from Mars and women are from Venus, because we found in the data that this was really not the case. So when we talked to journalists, we said to them explicitly, we do not want you to write men are from Mars and women are from Venus. So think about the message, think also how the knowledge you produce might be manipulated, because this is something they do. Make a good deal. I do not want to sound like Donald Trump, but still talk with journalists and try to get a good deal. In our case, we had this very large study. Journalists were very interested in the topic, so what we did is we divided the study into different topics. Something about condom use, something about sexual risk-taking, something about sexual and reproductive rights. So we try to have different topics that got out, and to make sure that we had a large exposure in different journals. Journalists did not always like that, because they always want to scope, they want to be the first, the one and only. And of course, then once we launched all these press releases, yeah, they sometimes were a bit disappointed about that. But also, and this is kind of a warning, you might also get disappointed, because what also sometimes happens is journalists, they call you, they say, oh, I think your research is fantastic. We want you in the 7 p.m. news tonight. So you're waiting, getting excited, getting overexcited, thinking about what should you wear when you go on television, and then they do not show up. So that happens, and that can be very frustrating. And they call you for a news article the day after, and then suddenly the editor decides not to publish. When you talk to journalists, always demand that you can read and correct if you are quoted in articles. This is usually one of the first things I say to journalists. Okay, everything is fine, but if you quote me, I should always be able to read in advance publication and have the right to change things. And then finally, always try to find a balance between facts, story, and package. We are researchers, we want the nuance, but many nuances do not always lead to a good story, and that is what a journalist wants. So try to find a balance, that you have a good story, but of course at the same time that the facts are right. And it's up to you, of course, as a researcher, to check that the facts are right. But journalists can really be your ally. They can present things in a way we cannot do it ourselves. So we'll have a look at this article, for example. We do it once a week, and more often during summer. That was not a really important thing, but they liked it. So okay, we said like, okay, you can publish this headline. Then we also had Humo, for example. They wrote a whole report on sex in Flanders. So that was really nice. They developed all these nice infographics. And then also another article, what if things go wrong during sex? So we had a lot of exposure. Of course, with our topic, it was not that difficult. So again, to wrap up, some lessons learned. You have a valorization strategy, you have a plan. It's not reality. It's not all things work out fine. I found it in this project very difficult that on the one hand, we had the steering group with the professors and we had the stakeholders in a separate group. I would never do that again. I would mix them up because you always get attention if you put people in different groups, where then usually the academics decide what will happen. And this is sometimes good, but not always good. So did we have long-term impact? Well, who knows? Up until today, I never saw any procedure about the assessment of impact that is really thorough and that really makes sense. It's just a very difficult thing to do. But of course, we can make an educated guess. And of course, when I talk about Sexpert, this was the first representative study in Flanders. And up until today, it's still one of the best studies and it's still quoted very often, although it's already 10 years old. If you want to reach out to local communities, write in the local language, publish in Dutch, publish in French, do it for the community. Do not only write international peer-reviewed articles. They are important for you, but people, practitioners, they do not read them. So publish in Dutch or in French or in other languages as well. Try to install direct links with policy, care, and practice. Past 6 years, I was a president of SENSOA, a Sexual Health Promotion Association in Flanders. Before me, Ambesse was the president of SENSOA, was also the head of the Sexpert study. So there were quite direct links, and that is important. So try to become the member of the board of directors of this association that might be interesting for your specific topic. Get engaged. And then finally, of course, education. We are very close often as academics to education. Many of you are teaching or will teach in the future. So of course, I think this was also one of the most important impacts of Sexpert, that many at different universities, they use the figures, they use the data in the educational program. Okay, second case study. This is about case of youth in the public space. It's quite recent. We just finished that one. It was within an Erasmus Plus project. It was all about socially engaged universities, a 3-year project, but with a relatively limited budget of 68,000 euros. We identified the specific challenges. It was a city of Ghent that contacted us because they had issues in the Keizerspark in Leerberg, challenged neighborhood, where youth often use, well, there is some drug use, where there are some incidents of crime, and we wanted to see, can we help stakeholders with tackling that very specific challenge? So what did we do, and how did we co-create? Well, first, together with the city of Ghent, we organized 2 preparatory meetings, and then we organized 4 co-creation sessions with stakeholders. Who were the stakeholders? The police, the prosecutor's office, the city of Ghent, of course, a youth association that is active in the clubhouse at the park, but also a psychologist, and of course also researchers. It was a very brief period between April and September 2020, so midst in Corona, of course, so it was all online, unfortunately. It was also facilitated by a co-creation expert, someone we hired, was paid for doing that, who could take some distance from the process. And then finally, it's important to stress, it was not only about those 4 meetings, it was really a process of active engagement. So people also got some homework after the meeting, they had to prepare some tasks before the next meeting, so it was an active process. We use different tools to get our stakeholders active, to get them engaged. For example, we asked them to write a journey, and we had a template for doing that. Basically, this journey was all about when something happens at the Keizerspark, what do you do as a stakeholder? Who do you call? How do you act? What is the timeline of your actions? And that is how we try to explore what our stakeholders actually did on the field related to this topic of youth in the public space. We also worked on developing how can we questions, and how can we questions are focused on solving specific problems. So we let them develop these how can we questions, then we had about 15 of them, and then each stakeholder could vote. What do they think is the best how can we questions that we then would use to create a shared challenge, something that we would try to solve. And then finally, we also assessed the co-creation process. We developed a brief survey of 15 items. This was part of another European project called Accomplish. And these 15 items, after each co-creation session, they had to fill in this brief questionnaire. It gave us an idea if the co-creation process was going well or not. So there were items like, is there a good way of decision-making? Do you feel joy during the co-creation process? Was there a positive atmosphere? Do you have the feeling that you achieved something or that you learned something? So this gave us an idea, are people content about how the process is going? If you scan the QR codes, you will go to a manual that we developed on co-creation. So to wrap up this case study, working with diverse stakeholders, it's not easy. It's actually difficult, but it's also very inspiring. You bring people together from different organizations that have different cultures, different languages, not actual languages, but different concepts, jargon that they use. They have different agendas. They do not share the same aim. Someone that works at the police department has a different aim than someone who works at a youth association. So these differences is something which you need to work on. How can you overcome also often feelings of mistrust? There was a lot of mistrust when we started the project. Brokering is important, having intermediary persons like me working for such an interdisciplinary consortium, but also the co-creation expert that we hired. And in the literature, they also sometimes refer to boundary objects, tasks that you give to the stakeholders through which you are able to develop a sense of shared identity. When you act together with people, they will eventually build up a shared identity. And that is really important if you want to achieve something with a group of people. There are so many tools, kind of assignments, templates that you can use. If you will just Google co-creation, how to do, you will find a lot of tools. So make use of the tools that exist to get people engaged. Okay, a final case study. This was about youth mental health during COVID-19. What was it about? Well, we knew based on research that youth of all age groups suffer the most in terms of mental health. Also that their voices are often ignored, that some are more challenged than others. If you live in a small apartment in Brussels, it's not the same than when you live in a nice villa with a large garden. So some are more challenged, but also that these youth play a role in the epidemic in terms of virus transmission. So we wanted to do something about that. The main goal was, how do we keep youth motivated to follow the rules, but also mentally healthy? We got a budget for that of €180,000 through VLAIO, Vlaams Agentschap voor Innoveren en Ondernemen. This was quite a budget, but a very brief period of time to actually achieve results. So there was quite some pressure to do something that mattered. So what did we do? We organized focus group with youth themselves, but also we went on a field exploration, a challenged neighborhood in Ghent, the Rabotwijk, where there is a lot of diverse communities, and where we also try to reach out to challenge youth, because basically some youth will not participate in focus groups. So we have to reach out. Then in a second step, we invited youth to help us co-create videos that we wanted to disseminate through social media. And then we had a bunch of 10 youth that were willing to do that. These youth were also trained. So we developed a manual. Again, QR code is there. A manual on psychoeducation, and the youth were basically trained. They got some tips on media communication, but also we based ourselves on the psychological needs theory. If you want to get a message across what is important for people, they need to have the feeling that they can make their own choices, autonomy. They have the feeling, they should have the feeling that they belong to a larger group, belongingness and competence. They should be able to develop skills. So then, of course, we started developing the videos. We worked closely together with What. They have a beautiful online platform, and they are experts in disseminating all types of information to youth populations. So this was a key stakeholder for us. And also, of course, we had a video director who helped us making the videos. Videos were all subtitled in 5 languages, in French, in English, in Arabic, in Turkish, and in Farsi. So that was also from the idea, we want to have the widest reach possible. And then, of course, the final step, dissemination through social media. Which social media? TikTok, YouTube, Instagram, the ones that are most oriented towards youth. We also worked together with youth influencers. They were paid for doing that. Again, What was a crucial stakeholder here to disseminate the messages. And then finally, paid ads on these social media were also quite important. On YouTube alone, we had more than 15,000 views, so we were quite happy about that. But to wrap it up, what did we learn from this project? Of course, social media, particularly for this target population, was quite important. It enabled us to have a really wide reach, but also what is interesting on social media is that you can gather data on what I would call proxy indicators of impact or whatever. You have data on reach, how many people could you potentially reach? That is. Then the second is exposure, how many people could see your advertisement or your campaign or your video. And then the third one is engagement, that people actually react on your post, that they share your post, that they leave a comment. And you can bring all those data together, which is quite interesting. Of course, this comes at a cost. It costs money. There's no doubt about that. And then, of course, a final critical remark is this actually impact? I think Esther already said it's science communication. That does not mean that you have impact. Of course, again, impact, how do you assess it? In our case, maybe you just found the videos nice, but did it also help them with their mental health? Who knows? It's difficult to know. And then also, challenged populations, did we reach them? I don't really think so. We also saw that our subtitles in Farsi and Arabic, they were not used a lot, so we were not that successful in that. Again, if you want to reach out to specific populations, it takes time, and you need stakeholders within those specific community. They are often called gatekeepers. But in the end, stakeholders are really key. So to wrap up this presentation, first, and it should not, it's not very astonishing, of course, have a plan, and there are many tools that can help you. There are things like an impact literacy workbook from Julie Bailey, for example, but we also, at a certain moment, developed a guide to impact planning, within which, within the guide, you find a lot of resources to do that. Consider your budget and outsource if you have a budget. Don't try to do everything yourself. Some people are better in it than you to make these infographics, for example. Of course, press and social media, they are crucial. So also think about that. Impact assessment, very difficult, but just try to keep track of your data. That can be the number of hits on a website, or the number of training modules that you were able to, the number of participants of a training module, for example. I would call these proxy indicators. So impact, how do we measure that? Well, I think still the best thing we can do today is comparable to what they do in the UK, in the United Kingdom, write up an impact case study. At the end of your project, you write a 5-pager and you try to make a narrative about why you think that you achieved impact, and of course build up your narrative with some proof that can be in qualitative nature when you did some interviews with stakeholders, for example, or quantitative when you have maybe some data from social media. And finally, and this I think is really important to wrap it all up, give something back to the community. If we as researchers want to successfully collaborate with stakeholders, with communities, we have to give something back. Yeah? It's not only about your PhD, it's not only about these publications and about funding, it's about doing something in society. And that's basically why you need a village to raise societal impact. Thank you for your attention, and yeah, questions are for later, I understood.
Thank you, Alexis, for introducing us to all the possibilities of co-creation. You've given us plenty to think about. It's about 10:30 now, so time for a quick break to keep us fresh. We'll start again at 10:50, so make sure you're back here by then. Het is straks aan jou.